My name is Susan Eaton, and I'm co-director of a new project called One Nation Indivisible, which is based at Harvard Law School and also based at the Poverty and Race Research Action Council. And I'm really excited about this panel today, which I think is going to be really great. It's got some of my favorite organizations represented as well. So as we know, as all of you know probably all too well, the general trend in the United States among schools and among policy has been away from desegregation and promoting cross-racial, cross-cultural contact among students. And I want to go back a little bit to what Cheryl Cashin was talking about in the introduction, the rise of the culturally dexterous class. Did I say that right? And I think that that's a really great way to think about the kind of work that all the folks on this panel are doing. We're going to talk to organizations today that aren't necessarily situated within schools, but who work primarily within communities, oftentimes with youth, sometimes not primarily with youth, but in communities, and bring some really exciting models for increasing cross-racial competence and also in expanding opportunities. And I'm not going to go into great length about people's bios. I'm going to ask folks to introduce themselves. We have the names here. And then I'm hoping that after the comments, we can have a conversation about the ways in which educators might think about using some of these models, making better use of some of these models, and ask questions. And there's a couple of researchers here that we're lucky to have with us in the crowd, Rosalind Mickelson and Bill Trent. And I'm going to pull them into the conversation, too, to talk a little bit about what some of the research says about the value of integration. So with that, why don't we start over here with Bill Tobin from Duke.
So I'm Bill Tobin. I'm at the Social Science Research Institute at Duke University. Before that, I was in the sociology department at Duke. And I want to begin by talking, I really like this idea of an essay or a try. And what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about an incredibly modest try at creating an inclusive, high-quality learning opportunity. And again, I want to stress the modesty of it, but I like the sense that this is an environment that invites, requires tries or essays. And this try or essay is based on the idea of preparation for college. And I'm going to focus on the selective college, 150 to 200 selective colleges. So, preparation for college, preparation for participation in a liberal arts community where most students study, has to be inclusive. Has to be inclusive. Given what we want the kids to do in my class, in my seminar, given what an inclusive liberal arts community looks like, what we aspire to on our campuses. You can't have kids self-segregating. You can't have kids who do not know how to work in a peer group. Even our math department has peer group work programs. You just can't do that. And so the assumption here is that a preparation in a homogeneous high school, a preparation in a homogeneous college track simply doesn't prepare you for what we want you to do when you come to college. It simply doesn't. And this work of synthesis, analysis, perspective generating, in other words, all the work that's involved in answering questions that do not have an answer or one answer. This is what we're trying to get kids to do in college. And this, and the Grutter Court knew this. This is the one area where they defer to the colleges on the educational benefits of diversity, right? They don't defer to them on the plus in the admissions. They defer to them on this specific point, that they got the idea of the educational benefits of diversity right. And the educational benefits of diversity come mostly, and again, I appreciate, and Roz is here, and other scholars, Bill Trent, I respect, but one of the big upsides of having an inclusive environment is the ability to do this work of synthesis, perspective building, answering questions that don't have a right answer. That's where the payoff in an inclusive learning environment really gets realized. And this is what we're trying to do at colleges. And I know Grutter's not focused on K-12, but it should help us think about college prep in preparation for college that some of the insights from Grutter should help us think about these things. You don't have to have an inclusive environment if the academic task is taking information from one place and putting it somewhere else. And I have enormous respect for that. That's important for the process. But if you want to do this work of synthesis, if you want to do this work of problem solving, inclusive learning environments, inclusive research teams, all the research from business schools to social science suggests you get the best answers and the best solutions in that kind of context. And so you take this idea, and this is what we tried to say to parents in New York where we worked, was if you want your child to be really prepared for college, whatever work group we're putting together, whatever program we're putting together, it has to be inclusive. And we say to colleges, most of the work I've been doing is at the policy level, we say to colleges, you've got to start, Fisher's a wake-up call. It's reminding us that we need to do more than have our admissions departments be the key way that we get the students to to realize the full benefits of a diverse class. The admissions department can't be the only place you do that. We've got to grow and nurture high schools and students. So that's the animating idea, and again, the challenge is to take that idea and to see what it looks like on the ground. So about 3 years ago, I was lucky enough to partner, and believe me, Susan, I'm going to watch the clock, okay? It seems like I'm beginning a 2-hour talk, but I'm actually going to close up fairly quickly. About 3 years ago, I was lucky to participate in a partnership between the town of Rye, New York, which is about 30 miles north of Manhattan, a biracial community organization, building community bridges, to create this program called Tools for Change, which is a research-based problem-solving seminar for high school students. And because we know that the most creative, innovative, and practical research solutions come from inclusive teams, students for the program were drawn from 3 district high schools. These are 3 districts that were geographically proximate but racially and economically distinct. One wealthy, largely white district, another largely white district and wealthy district that was in the transition that we talked about this morning in terms of integration, and a third district that's predominantly Hispanic. The program started when community members tried unsuccessfully to get the school board to create diverse learning opportunities for their kids. School board pushed them back, rebuffed them. But the town supervisor, who's a staunch Republican, but a hedge fund manager, who has funds across the world. And so he speaks Spanish. He travels extensively. He knew that a diverse experience, diverse preparation was really important. He called me and said, can we think of a way to create a program? And I had been doing policy work along with the work I do at Duke, the teaching. Didn't want to get back in the classroom, didn't want to create a program at that level, but realized that it would be a great opportunity. So along with his support and the support of this biracial organization called Building Community Bridges, who agreed the town and this organization funded the program, we then went to try to create the program with buy-in from the schools. And so what's the program look like? It's co-taught with one of the high school teachers from one of the high schools. We have a community outreach director who's the president of the League of Women Voters. And the content is based on an honors program that I created in the sociology department at Duke, where the students, we've had anywhere from 15 to 22 students, the students pick a problem. Voter turnout 2 years ago, last year, was the relationship between social media and civic participation. Again, there's a civic dimension to all the problems because the town is paying. And then you teach them the steps in the social science research process. Again, the categories are the ones they're going to be greeted with when they get to college. The processes, the ways of thinking, they're all based on what we're doing in college. So they teach them how to have an engaged attitude to the world. If a girlfriend breaks up with you, do you sit and eat a gallon of ice cream every night for a week? Or do you try to say, what went wrong there? Has this ever happened before? Do I know other people? And again, do I know other people who've had this experience? You know, it's like an attitude. It's like you don't accept life. You say, how did that happen? So try to cultivate or introduce that. And some of the students already have it, but you want to that's really a good first step. Then, think about how do you frame a research question that can be answered? How do you, what methods do you choose? The kids have done focus groups, they've done interviews, they've done surveys, they've done some preliminary quantitative analysis. They've analyzed the findings. They've created policy recommendations out of the findings. Again, the whole range of things that you'd want a student to do. And the thing I'd add to this is that Duke and all the other selective or even outside that top 200 or 300 schools, they're dying to have kids, and the researchers in the room know this, they're dying to have kids who are into research and might have an idea what that could be and could learn that in 4 years. It's an incredibly small pool of kids. And so you're kind of teaching them something that's going to be immediately valuable and distinguish them from the rest of their peers. I'm coming to a close here, Susan.
No, I'm
some
enjoying
outcomes.
it.
Some outcomes. I kind of think of the outcomes in 3 clumps. And the first clump I think is less important for how we've been kind of thinking about this. First outcome is about those cultural competencies. And I can tell you lots of stories, I can share you lots of emails from the students about these. One of the things we do in the program is that most of the work is done in peer-led groups, right? So, for example, we'll meet every 2 weeks, and then the students who've been in the program before will lead peer-led work groups. So, for example, 1 week they had to come up with a survey, and so that it would be we target sophomores. This would be a junior or a senior who'd been in the program at least 1 year. She or he is leading the peer-led work group. So what does that mean? Well, that means getting high school kids, which is a very big challenge, to turn work in, to take it seriously. And I'm going to read you in a few minutes, I'll exchange an email within this group, but the point is I oversee the groups and the co-teacher oversees the group, but the kids are turning the work out or not turning it out and getting crap from the peer leader. And I don't know most of the stuff that's happening there, but that's where the learning, the intercultural learning's happen. And I get hints of it, but that's where it's learning. Then you get the other kinds of things, and there's stereotypes that have truth to them. So for example, the Hispanic kids are just as smart as the white kids in the wealthy suburbs. And again, I'm working with stereotypes, I realize that, and I apologize in advance. They will not raise their hand. And again, there's exceptions, right? They will not raise their hand even when they've read the material. Will not raise their hand. They've read the material, they have stuff to say. Some of the white kids, they'll raise their hand if they haven't even thought about what you're asking. And so part of what you want to do here, and again, this is this first component of kind of cultural competence, you want the Hispanic kids to be more entitled. And you want the other kids to be less entitled and to be more respectful. And again, I can talk a whole bunch about what we found with the exit interviews and the stuff, but I think there's a piece there that's really, you ask kids to bring their laptops. How many laptops come from Portchester High School? Well, none. And so you got the students start thinking about that. So that's a really important piece, but I think the other 2 pieces are the critical pieces. If what we say is true, and what I told the parents, and what I told the school districts, and the first year we had 1 school district formally on board. Now we have all 3 school districts formally on board, where we work with them formally, is that an inclusive research group is going to turn out better research processes, and it's going to turn out better solutions. So the criterion can't just be intercultural competence. It has to be the research process, right, and the outcomes. So what about the research process? Well, if I did this in one school, we wouldn't have done a Spanish survey. And I know that's not a big thing, right? We would have done an English survey on voter turnout, and we would not have done a Spanish survey because we had nobody in the class who could translate the survey, despite the fact that town, a third of the town was Spanish speaking. And again, I'm not saying that's important, the research in the room, that's a minor thing, but you see, it's a mindset. On that survey, we wouldn't have had incoming class questions. And here's the other thing I want to read you, just a brief excerpt. This is an exchange in the peer group. And this is all research process, right? And this is between a team leader and one of the students. Today at lunch, I was reading what you wrote. It was pretty good, but there are some things that could make it even better. I thought it was good how you summarized what the article was saying, but there was really nothing in our specific future study that you related to what you said. In other words, make a point about what the article said and relate it to something in our future study. Also, don't ask questions in your clumps. Say something that relates to the question you asked, but not an actual question. I'm going to stop, but the point I want to make is notice how respectful that is, right? What you want the kids to do is engage in a respectful manner. But the second thing is, that's a substantive exchange. They're not talking about the weather. They're taking each other seriously on a substantive thing. They are working that out. And you, as a teacher, you just want to stay out of the way of that. Because whatever's happening there, and I don't want, and again, I want to be clear, this is a small thing, it's a small program, but I think these are good things to have the students direct each other at a substantive and respectful way. So that's the little of the outcome. Then the outcomes, you know, I think each year the kids have policy recommendations, and this year they are going to create a civic solution shop where they are going to help community organizations who have not been able to figure out how to use social media to accomplish some of their goals. So they're out in the community, they're going to deal with clients, and the solution shop is going to be the students who in the third year. So I kind of think of the first year as learning skills and mindsets, the second year as teaching, and the third year as wisdom, right? And wisdom has a social component. So here they are trying to say, how can I serve a client that walks in the door? I want to leave you with two puzzles. The first puzzle is, I asked a student if they wanted to be in the program. I said, oh no, I'm in band, and I'm also in dance. And oh, you got a lot of stuff going on there. Well, I know that college admissions officers really want us to do a lot of activities. And so my first puzzle is, the admissions process is so decoupled from what actually happens in the classroom that it discourages kids from doing things that would be good for them when they get in, and discourages them from doing the kinds of things where inclusive engagement is necessary. If the academic preparation for the top 150 or 200 schools is about individual academic achievement, right? Moving stuff from one book to another place and then putting on a test, you don't need inclusive stuff for that. But if it's about doing the things that you want a kid to do in a freshman seminar, you need the inclusive stuff, and the academic or the admissions stuff has to reflect that. And I've been fighting this battle for a while. I think it's a hard puzzle. But the second thing is, the high schools weren't interested in the program. They had tests, they had No Child Left Behind requirements, and all these things. We're not interested. And you know, we finally said to them, you do what you need to do. We're going to create a program that's going to try to prepare the kids for college success, because they have a full plate. And I mean to be respectful, but they haven't bought in as much because they have so many things on their plate already. And the second puzzle is, how do you get high schools, or who should own a program like this? You know, and what we want down the line is we want, you know, have the 3 districts do an AP class together, or 3 districts do other kinds of things. Eventually those 3 districts might need to merge based on economies of scale, but we're trying to plant some seeds to get that done. I'm sure I went over, Susan, you're very gracious, and I appreciate that.
I'm very bad at timekeeping, though I'll take the gracious compliment. That was fascinating. Ken Tanabe is here from Loving Day.
Hello. So diversity makes a better classroom. I'm going to argue that it also makes a better party with educational benefits. So here goes. So I'm Ken Tanabe, founder of Loving Day. Now, Loving Day, for those of you who don't know, is named after the Supreme Court decision Loving versus Virginia, which legalized interracial marriage in the United States in 1967. So the most visible part of our project is to encourage people to celebrate the anniversary of that case around June 12th. For the milestone that it is, our mission is to fight racial prejudice through education and to build multicultural community as a way to further that educational mission. So education, it's a key part of what we do. We focus primarily in terms of content on the Loving case and similar. So sort of the court history that led up to the Loving decision and state laws, things like that. But also ideas about multi-ethnic identity and ideas about the community, building community around that identity. So what we want to teach is not really part of the traditional civil rights curriculum. At least it wasn't part of the one that I got, and many people that we talked to haven't gotten it. So, you know, the Loving decision is not in the textbooks with Brown versus Board of Ed or the Rosa Parks story. You know, we also want to share ideas about race and identity outside of kind of the mainstream constructs. You know, for a long time we've been thinking in terms of like the sort of 5-box system and the pre-2000 census form, that kind of thing. So we're trying to push people outside of that. You know, sharing ideas about race being just like a social construct, moving beyond black and white as sort of model, again, multi-ethnic identity, and also sort of ideas such as, you don't have to be part this and part that, right? You can be both something and something else. So how do you share these? These are pretty complex ideas, right? And we're asking people to unlearn quite a bit of what they've learned. So how do we do that? Primarily through events. We are fortunate to have a very, very diverse audience. The Loving Day celebrations happen around June 12th. And we host some of those events. We're most famous for the flagship celebration in New York, which is coming up on June 9th. You should come. And we get about 1,000 guests a year, so that's a pretty large event. We also encourage others to host their own celebrations. So that's almost anything you can imagine. People personalize these events, which makes them even more compelling. This year, we've got a guy running a triathlon in Denver, Colorado, as an idea. Never would have thought of that. There's been a Loving Day cruise. Sounds pretty good. Numerous film festivals, one in New Orleans, one in Los Angeles, called the Mixed Roots Film and Literary Festival. The president's sister was there last year. And this year it's Key and Peele. You know those guys on Comedy Central? Yeah, we got some nods there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's a big deal. But mostly we're talking about picnics and barbecues, backyard community celebrations, which gives people an opportunity to have these discussions, but also a framework for the discussion. The loving case isn't everything, but it's a great starting point to talk about, about these issues. And really what we're trying to do is build a tradition, which is ambitious, but we're trying to build a tradition that's shared among friends and passed down from generation to generation. That's where I think it gets really exciting. Parents host these events, their kids are there, they host for their children, etc. Now, what's interesting is that June is not terribly convenient for academia, right? Like most of the time, it's summertime. So a lot of college students in these multi-ethnic community groups came up with the idea of celebrating early. So we've got events happening literally between Valentine's Day and graduation, which is fantastic. Another idea that's very compelling that came from the community is that people choose Loving Day as their wedding date. So they get married around June 12th as a statement, basically. So when we host events, our methods are very practical. We want to be appealing. We want people to want to participate even if they have no idea what we're talking about, right? And they can find out once they get there. Shameless usage of DJs and music and musicians and free food and all of those things allow us to sort of populate our events. And also, we want to make the project look and feel cool, for lack of a better word. Little background about me, I'm a graphic designer, actually. Most of you are probably lawyers or superintendents or something, right? So, but making things look appealing is my job, basically, right? For brands. So, Loving Day actually started as an academic project. It was my graduate thesis at Parsons School of Design, which some of you may know from Project Runway. It's probably the only time anyone will say Project Runway at this conference. So, we think about the project like almost like a subculture, right? Like skateboarding or something like that. And it's been pretty effective. We've even had somebody get the Loving Day logo, which is actually on the pins that I think might have started to be passed around, as a tattoo on their arm. So if that's not subculture, I don't know what is. We also think like a brand. We have those pins, but we have shirts. You can even get a Loving Day skateboard. You can get a Loving Day anything, basically. And that kind of thinking has gotten us support from people like, we don't get support from the school system. We get support from Puma, or like Asahi, the Japanese brewery, or Zipcar. They've all supported us, and we're all over social media because you have to. But that doesn't mean that we don't have community partners in education and beyond. Some interesting examples: a nonprofit called World Up that uses global hip hop as a way to teach people about issues in different countries. You want to learn about Senegal? What are they rapping about in Senegal? Interesting, right? Everyone from them to like celebrity people who have worked with like David Chang, the celebrity chef, will help us do a dinner party. Or we did a fundraiser concert with Broadway show cast members. They're called Broadway in South Africa, people from like Lion King and Jersey Boys. So we're really all over the place. But we're active all year. For example, we have these events that are more not unlike this, to tell you the truth. You remember candidate Obama's speech on race? You recall this, right? So after that, we got a conversation together at NYU, and we invited all the community to come. We had NYU students, we had high school teachers bringing their students to join the conversation. It was fantastic. We just had an event at the International Center of Photography. Has everyone heard of this film, The Loving Story? It came out on HBO on Valentine's Day. Great marketing timing. Yes. So we led a group of people to see those photos, but also to lead a conversation around it. And same thing, teachers brought their classes. It was a wonderful experience. We're at conferences, like the annual conference on multi-ethnic identity at Harvard. There's a biannual one at DePaul called the Critical Mixed Race Studies Conference. We speak at universities like Columbia, NYU, University of Maryland. Lovingday.org is our website. I strongly recommend, if you haven't already, to go check it out because it is full of resources for you to use in the classroom or to encourage others to do so. Courtroom history, lists of books and films that are important. My personal favorite is an interactive map where you can see which states banned interracial marriage in which year, and then you can read the outrageous laws to your class, which is great material. Well, it's horrible material, but it's also great material for conversation. And we also provide direct help to students. Do you know there's a National History Day competition every year? We've had multiple projects about Loving versus Virginia. We've provided direct assistance to those students as well. So to wrap it up, I think we've managed to be pretty effective with minimal resources. We're all donation and volunteer driven. We don't even have an office, but somehow we've had events in 43 cities last year from here to Tokyo. Time Magazine, NPR, Washington Post, CNN, the BBC has flown in from England twice. Not bad. An official recognition in DC, and also in Caroline County, Virginia, which is the hometown of Mr. and Mrs. Loving. So really we're about educating outside of the classroom and inside of it as well. You know, going after hearts and minds, creating an experience that feels good, that looks cool, that you'd want to do regardless. And let people personalize that, let them reinvent it, let them bring it to people that they know, and really to create a tradition for a growing and a vibrant community. So I hope you will attend one of our celebrations. I hope even more that you will host one or encourage folks in your networks to host a celebration and use our resources on lovingday.org. Thanks.
Excellent. I just want to share a quick anecdote about Loving Day, too. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was up on the Loving Day website, and I was trying to learn a little bit more about different events that were going on to see if we could get somebody out there to document something. And I had left it up on the screen, and my two teenage boys, who usually come in and look at whatever I'm up there working, they're like, how can I get rid of this? I'm going to minimize it. Do I have to save it? And don't pay any attention. And they happen to both be going into the small office that I have with groups of their friends, a very culturally mixed, racially mixed group of kids. And one of my sons said, what's that? And I said, oh, it's really interesting. You guys should look at it. And I was just about to give a kind of speech about Loving Day and the importance of, civil rights, still ongoing importance in our country. And one of the kids, whose parents, his mother is African American and his father is white, said, what? Like, it used to be illegal? I said, oh yeah, it used to be illegal. And then I just stepped away, and they started looking at the website, and I heard this just amazing conversation going on that if I had stayed involved and your website wasn't there, I don't think could have been sustained. So it just reinforced to me how I think all of us who are committed to these things, need to think really creatively and use the kind of tools that I think you've employed and these other organizations have employed really successfully. Anyway, so now we're going to hear from another one of my favorite organizations, Welcoming America. Jessie Molina is going to talk about her organization.
Thank you. My name is Jessie Molina, and I'm Director of Programs for the Southern Region at Welcoming America. We're a national organization based in Atlanta, and we're trying to reach people who are afraid, distrustful, have anxiety, and just concerned about immigration and immigrants, and see if we can broaden their perspectives on the issue. So we have 22 affiliates across the country. We support them at our national office in Atlanta, and I'm responsible for the Southern region. So the way that we do that is basically by bringing people together. So we bring immigrants and non-immigrants together in social events, for potlucks and barbecues, like you mentioned, for community service activities. And we do educational screenings on immigrant-related issues, trying to reach what we call the receiving community, or what that means is the communities where immigrants are coming to, which are increasingly not just the urban areas that are used to immigration, but increasingly suburban areas, rural areas, which are not as used to immigration and not as happy about it. So one of the more formalized initiatives we have is the Dialogue Project. And this is a structured conversation that we facilitate that includes immigrants and non-immigrants to come together to have an open and honest and very open and honest conversation. And usually how it starts is with a meal. And we start, with eating together, and then have a 2.5 to 3 hour conversation that really asks people to share how they feel. And often people don't do that outside of their own groups. So within their own groups, they can say all kinds of things about immigrants, but not usually. People don't usually say those things to each other. And we're creating a space where people can do that, and the effects have been pretty amazing. So we have 3 classic questions we use in these dialogues. The first question is, what in your experience has led you to think the way you think about immigration? What usually comes out of this question is that most people haven't had any experience with it. Most of what they've heard has come from the media, from TV, from Fox. And so, and so that experience allows them to hear from other people's experiences. So if you have immigrants in the room, undocumented immigrants and others, they are able to share why they came here, how they came here, and tell their stories. Because really, the way the question is asked, what in your experience, is asking for stories. And those stories tend to be really powerful for people. The second question is, what is at the heart of the matter of this issue for you? And what that's asking, what's at the essence of it, what's at the core of this for you? So people will say things like, for me, it's just people shouldn't be breaking the law. It's not fair. That's what's at the heart of the matter. And other people will say, well, people should have a chance to feed their families, a chance to live, a chance to thrive. There's different things that's at the core of it for you, but that conversation allows people to explore kind of what's at the heart of it for them. The third question we use is, within your own thinking, are there any gray areas or doubts or uncertainties or questions you have, even within your own thinking about immigration? And that allows people to say things like, well, I support immigration and I really believe in it, but I'm afraid about what will happen if we completely open our borders. Or I don't believe in immigration and I don't think illegal immigration is right, but I do understand how parents will want to feed their children at whatever cost, at whatever it takes to do that. And throughout the 2.5 hour conversation, we ask people to ask each other questions, when they hear something that might trigger them to feel offended or feel afraid or to feel shut down, to actually move through that, to sit with discomfort and to ask some questions and to hear from people who they ordinarily would not have a chance to be in the room with. And so we've just had a really amazing experience doing that. I'll just share 2 examples. We organized a dialogue at Morehouse College in Atlanta, and it was with students and faculty. And the student leaders were from the Republican Club, the Democratic Student Club, president of the African Students Association, president of the Muslim Students Association. Lots of different people were there. And the president of the Republican Students Association came in with a hard line of, I don't believe in this immigration, and it's, we should focus on the people who are here, and we should treat criminals like criminals, people who come to this country illegally. And over the course of the 2.5 hours, it's really changed how he thought about it and really opened his perspective on it, and said that he wanted to be a leader within his party for change and to really push his party to think differently about this issue. Really, it's the stories that make the difference, and I was facilitating a conversation with a cohort of Georgia State teachers. They will be, they're in a program for alternative route to getting a teaching certificate. And so they'll all be teachers in urban areas. And so they've been a cohort for a year, they're very close, they're together for a year. And it was really powerful for them to hear from each other. So we ran around and asked that first question, and one after another, I'm okay with immigration, I'm just not okay with illegal immigration. I don't like people who break the law. It's not right to break the law, over and over and over again. And not in that first question, but over the course of the time it came out, students were brave in sharing, and some of their parents were undocumented, that, and one person, the story I think that really shifted things and for that class was that one student mentioned her boyfriend, who was the eldest of 6 siblings in a country in South America, and whose mother, when she got cancer, was no longer able to work to support the family, and so he came here illegally and is now the sole source of support for that family and for his mother's medications and for raising his siblings, and sending the money to raise his siblings. And that story was very powerful for those students, and could realize, to not only take a position on something, but to think about, well, why would people make these choices if we're all people? Why would people make some of these choices that you are condemning? And so I think, and then that class became an advocate for hosting other conversations at Georgia State, and also became really involved in spreading this message about just what we're seeing, is that people don't know the basic facts about immigration. They don't know how people get to this country. They don't know what a visa is. They don't know what it means to come. They think basically that you would check a box like, come here legally or illegally. I think I'll do illegally because it's cheaper or something. So people don't really understand kind of how the system works, and we're using these dialogues as a way to not only teach them the facts and the debunk some of the myths around it, but also for them to hear from each other some of the stories about people's lives, and that's what makes a difference every time. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'll leave that for now because I know we want to have a conversation, but it's been a pretty amazing experiment in allowing people to talk to one another and with each other, and the goals that we have for these conversations are just to increase human connection and understanding between groups that ordinarily don't have a chance to build that. Thank you.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about Welcome to Shelbyville, which I think I've seen used a couple of times in school districts to great effect?
Sure. So, Welcome to Shelbyville is a film that was made about, our work, Welcoming America, our work in Tennessee, in a town in Tennessee called Shelbyville, a small town, mostly Christian, white and black town for many years. And they received an influx of Somali refugees who were black, who were Muslim, who also wore a very distinctive clothing, and the women were covered. And that created quite a disturbance in this very small town in Tennessee. People were very afraid. It was close to, it wasn't that close to 9/11, but people were afraid that this was related to, terrorists coming, invading their small town. And so the movie talks about how this community comes together through basically conversations and dialogues and social events and eating together. And so as an ESL teacher figures out a way to bring people together by having people come to to people's houses and sharing Somali food and customs. They actually, a reporter had been writing pretty horrible things about the Somalis, about their cultures, about their disgusting hygiene habits, which all kinds of very racist things. And they actually invited the reporter to come to their community and to asked him questions about what kind of impact, how it made them feel bad, how it hurt them to have these kinds of comments in the town, in a small town newspaper. And he actually agreed to write different articles and to share the other side of the story. So it's just really a way of an example, the movie, of engaging people as opposed to just shutting them down as racist and ignorant. That's one way that you can talk about these people, but another way is to, their town looked one way for many years, and it is scary to them for it to change, for the place that they grow up to look different, to feel different, to, and so our organization asks people to engage these communities and to educate them and to involve them and to help them participate with the newcomers that are coming, so that we can just build more connection between them.
Where can you get the film? Is it downloadable, or you have to pay for it, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where? I'm sorry?
You have to pay for it.
I understand.
It was a film. There's a licensing agreement. If you want to show it at particular places, there may be some free,
I don't mind
showing.
paying for it, I'm asking where I get it.
Come to our website, welcomingamerica.org, and there's a tab you can click on to learn more about the film. The other thing you can do is just email me directly, Jessie, Jessy, at welcomingamerica.org, and I can get you in touch with the people of how to order it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Another one of my favorite organizations.
First of all, I think it's so interesting just what's been shared so far, and I'm still definitely processing that. And so I have both the flip side of going last, of being excited to share and having all this time to prepare, but then also being totally sidetracked by all of the amazing work that you're doing. My name is Jamie Jen Lewis. I'm the executive director of an organization called Border Crossers based out of Manhattan. Can I do a quick raise of hands, show of hands? Who here works in a school? And who here's a teacher in a school? Administrator? And then who, are you all in education policy? Lawyers-ish? Researchers? Interested people? Okay. Well, I'm also going to be brief because I would like to also open this up for some questions and answers, or questions and hear about your thoughts on all the work that we're doing. But basically, Border Crossers provides resources for elementary age teachers to address issues of race and issues of structural racism in their classrooms with elementary age students. Easy, right? But what I want to do today, kind of similar to what Bill did, was present our organization and tell us the story of our organization as a case study, and a very humble case story. We started 11 years ago, and our founding program, we'll call it the Sister School Program, sought to bring together students from different backgrounds, similar to Bill's story again, from different backgrounds who are located within the same, a close geographic proximity, but serve very different demographics of students. We used to say blocks apart but miles away in terms of resources. And actually, hold on, I'm actually also going to take a step back, because as I tell you the story, I also want you to see this as a model for how a program like this could work, but also see how, sorry, I'm looking through my notes, to see how the framework for doing a program like this, for approaching this work as an outside organization but within schools, has to be inherently flexible. So the beginning of our program started 11 years ago. We brought students together through a series of structured activities. They would begin with a pen pal exchange, move through meetups, and then eventually identify a social action project that they wanted to collectively take action on together. We explored the Border Crossers' key concepts of identity, community, and change in a multicultural setting. And the idea of this, it was very successful in many ways. So we worked with over 20 different elementary schools, and it did reduce race, class, and cultural isolation in its participants. But we had many challenges. First of all, the program was first and foremost very labor intensive, that it was expensive to coordinate meetups between schools. And just to provide a little bit of a cross-section of an example, we'll say that you find a school that meets the criteria, and this was another pitfall that we found, an uneasy feeling about tokenizing or essentializing or even typecasting students and whole school communities based on their race or based on their class. But then say finding 2 4th grade teachers who are aligned with our mission vision, and philosophy, enough to want to participate, but who had social studies at the same time, who had compatible holiday and testing schedules, you would still need a super facilitator to be present to make it work. And this was just not sustainable for us. So we were looking to do similar to what Bill was saying earlier, to provide these inclusive, high-quality learning environments, and to facilitate teachers in doing that. And so that kind of takes us to this evaluation portion, which was about over the past 5 years. We continued on really wrestling with this model, trying to impact kids as our primary focus, doing a great job in isolated cases, but not achieving the overall results that we wanted. And by the way, our results that we wanted were to impact students' behavior, but also ultimately student thought, and address this idea of cultural and structural racism in classrooms from a young age. So we took a step back, and after about 9 years of our program, we found a common thread through what teachers were saying in all these evaluations, which is that they sought more guidance for how to talk about issues of race and class with these young students. That we found 2 major trends. One was that either teachers really wanted to, but didn't feel like they were being supported in doing it. And the second was that they were essentially taking the colorblind route of saying that they didn't really want to, and they were happy that we had this program that brought students together, but just kind of touched on this surface idea of visible diversity. So that kind of, those impacts, the impact of that evaluation really struck a chord with us. It really resonated. So we moved on, and this is actually officially where I came in too. We looked at what we were doing, and we realized that the teacher professional development model was the kind of the core piece of it being able to be implemented impactfully or not. So last year, we officially launched a series of workshops to kind of address that gap in our program, and it was called Talking About Race with K through 5. We went through a lot of different titles, like creating a culture of diversity, or creating a room for dialogue with young students, and we realized that we kind of just wanted to call it Talking About Race with K through 5, because that's exactly what we do. So basically, that workshop is a 6-hour workshop, and it seeks to give teachers concrete tools as well as practice space, a safe practice space for talking about issues of race with elementary age students. A little bit about the structure of that workshop is that we start with the foundations of what race is and what race isn't, how children come to understand race, and we look at a few different cognitive models, and also how that applies to both white students, students of color, and also within students of color, different groups in there. And then for the rest of the workshop, we use teacher-generated scenarios to collectively develop strategies, to collectively say, what are we going to do when, we're teaching a lesson on diversity, but then a student says, why aren't there any black teachers in the school, or something like that. And then we have them, we in a very supported way, throw them in the deep end, and have them start practice using the words that they would say, practice using these strategies, practice saying, wow, that's a really good question. I'm going to need to think. Or, I'm really glad you noticed that, but I'm going to have to come back to you. Or, that's actually something I wonder too. What can we do about it? So we have them practice using these strategies to start opening up the conversation about race with young students. So if you take a step back from that, you'll see that we changed our access point from looking at students, impacting students directly, with using teachers as that access point. Entering into the teachers while remaining student-focused, while really looking at what creates an equitable approach to conversations about race. And we've had a lot of success in that too. And it's also interesting to notice that as outside organizations, I think we have another an interesting role that we can take, because we can take stances that schools may not be able to take, that districts may not be able to take. Bill, I'm interested in hearing about kind of the relationship you have with school and administration and what you have to do. But we basically come in and train up teachers to have these conversations within their classroom. That was the past year. This upcoming year, we are moving into whole school communities. After every one of our workshops, we get calls from diversity directors, from administrators, from teachers, or from a cohort of teachers, from even parents who want to bring our workshop into their school community in some capacity. So this next year, we're actually launching our workshop into schools to see how we can not have our impact multiplied by not having a student who has a teacher who went to a workshop for 6 hours on a Saturday, but who is actually immersed in a culture where the teachers are supporting each other, where they're continually learning and wrestling with these ideas in order to hopefully have a transformative effect. So.
Excellent. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm not going to try to wrap something up really beautifully. I'm just going to open it up to comments and questions and conversation. I think this has been a really great, eye-opening and panel that's generated some great ideas. So anybody has questions? Chester?
Yeah, I'm Chester Hartman. I'm the Prax Director of Research. I co-edited a book as a flyer on the literature table called The Integration Debate, Competing Futures for American Cities. In the introductory essay that my co-editor, Greg Squires, who's my colleague in the Sociology Department of Washington University, we referred to Cheryl's book, The Failures of Integration, and I want to just two short quotes to make the point I'm asking about. She quotes one black resident of a middle-class Atlanta neighborhood. "When I have to work around them all day, by the time I come home, I don't want to have to deal with white people anymore." It's kind of integration exhaustion or race fatigue. And as Cheryl herself recounts, in conversation after conversation with black friends, acquaintances, and strangers, integration is simply not a priority in the way that getting ahead is. What black people now seem most ardent about is equality of opportunity. As one black acquaintance once put it, rather than wanting to integrate with whites, black people now seem more interested in having what whites have. So given that this crowd here is very pro-integration, are there some interesting aspects on it that, not on the part of racists, but on the part of people like us, people of color and whites, that suggest some limitations or some doubts about integration that maybe we ought to be acknowledging and discussing? It's disturbing in some ways, but it's there.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I like to do is problematize the idea that integration actually happened in a widespread manner. I think that some places it did, but in most places, even in the schools, it didn't. Because in the schools, for example, we know a school that on the face of it is integrated was resegregated by tracking group. And the administration and the teachers often were not integrated. So even if the numbers were there, the schools weren't always. So I suspect that if we were to carefully look at other institutions where integration happened, the same kinds of things will be revealed. And before we move beyond integration, I think we ought to try it.
But I mean, you got to break it down. The school thing, and my oldest son went to Professor Chevy Chase High School here at Milligan High School, which at the macro level is wonderfully integrated. You know, everyone. But you get into the IB program or the AP program, and it's totally white. And you know, the way in which schools can break that apart, or any system can break it apart, it really needs to be acknowledged and dealt with.
Yes.
Bill?
A couple things. There's a very good book by Elizabeth Anderson, who's a social philosopher, and that book makes, I think, some important definitional clarity about what we're talking about when we talk about integration. And one of the things I've always been challenged by is the extent to which we conflate integration to mean no more than desegregation. And I think that's really problematic in our understanding. But what Anderson does is to go beyond that and make the distinction between assimilation, which is really problematic, colorblindness, which is even more problematic, and distinguishing each of those from desegregation. And I think, I may misquote her, so do get the book and read the section yourself, but I think the discussion in there about understanding pluralism really helps us understand what the integration project might well be if we were really taking it on. And at the core of it, I think it is about opportunity and equality of educational opportunity and resources, certainly. But I think we've tried to privilege race relations in a very heavy-handed way that hasn't been at the core of a lot of concerns in the African American community. One of the things that underscores that and really makes it problematic is the way in which those initial years unfolded and the number of African American educators who lost their positions as educators. That hasn't been forgotten by a lot of people in my age cohort and in a lot of communities. And I think when you couple that with an overemphasis on race relations as opposed to opportunity, it really makes it a more difficult project to do. So
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. And I mean, there's a huge difference between a desegregated school and an integrated school as
Right.
well. And then to some extent, I mean, the kinds of things that you're talking about where there's, this within the African American community cannot be addressed in just a desegregated school. It almost has to have the kinds of processes that these folks are trying to engage in. And in some ways, I feel like these organizations like this are doing the work that schools should be doing, but for whatever reason can't do as well. So
we dramatically underestimate how pervasive segregation really is and how entrenched ignorance as a result of that segregation really is. So the work that your organizations do, your projects are doing, really gets at that, really begins to help people work through that ignorance. I lived through it by going to an all-white undergraduate school immediately after leaving Richmond, Virginia in 1962. And it was amazing to encounter the amount of ignorance, not just that whites had about me, but that I had about them. So there's exaggerations on both sides. And it's almost like Aristotle's allegory of the cave. That we think we see chairs, but what we see are really disfigurations.
yeah, and what you brought up about the past and things that happened during desegregation as well. If anyone's interested in those issues, there's a really good workshop with Vanessa Siddle-Walker, David Tipson, and others happening after this as well, which I think gets to some of those things.
Just to echo Bill's point, that he went to school in 1962, and here we are in 2012, when I have a daughter who's in college, and some of what you just said to me echoed back her some of her peers. So I think the issue of integration and not just desegregation, and Beverly Daniels Tatum brought all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria.
We
echoes the
talk
same-
about race.
Exactly the same sentiment that we're together, and I think like a tossed salad, we're living side by side in a bowl, but not integrated, not, together the way you all propose in your sports styles and your various organizations. And that I think is part of the problem. I don't think it's so much of blacks. I think it's always been wanting access to what others who are privileged in society have, as opposed to some dire need to be around everybody else per se. But I think to move beyond that, it takes learning about one another in a more thoughtful, authentic fashion than what we see we have done.
Independent schools on the Upper East Side have like 10 students of color. And the person, and I totally go there, but
So I guess then I'm wondering, that your answer is actually really makes me now even more, this question is now even more alive in my mind. How do y'all see the relationship between the work you're doing and the work that a lot of the folks on the panel or people here have been talking about. So at one level, we have entrenched housing segregation, we have entrenched school segregation, right? We have just, and there's now a whole lot of there are a whole lot of efforts today that assume that will be the case and then work, right? So a lot of school reform now is assuming that we're gonna have racially isolated schools. How do we make them better? I'm wondering, to what extent are your programs then predicated on the same assumption? Like, are these programs that assume that the schools, that people are going to be living largely isolated lives, going to racially separate schools, and then they're gonna come together? Like, the moment where people are gonna come together is when you all come into the Upper East Side private school and you're gonna facilitate a workshop.
Can I jump in on that really quickly? Yes, I mean, and no. We think that,
Well, I think the answer is no, but I sort of want to hear why.
right, I mean, first of all, what we tell schools that are predominantly white is that white is not the absence of race, and that everyone has to be a part of the change, and so we do, and also we have to make money to survive. And so right now, Border Crossers is, because we just launched this program, we are working in predominantly, I wouldn't say predominantly even, I would say 60% schools that can pay us for our services. And then the rest are grant funded. And also that it is a collaborative effort. We see New York as one city that will always have its differences, and we want to have distinct cultural identities, but we do need to start training up young, privileged white kids on the Upper East Side how to start thinking about this and how to start having a vocabulary and having an equity lens when they look at these issues. With the idea that no, then that is kind of our theory of change to bringing society together.
So when they become hedge fund managers, they'll have a vision like
They'll fund that racial
Ken
isolated charter school.
under.
Ken?
Yes.
Ken wanted to say.
I did. I'd like to sort of simplify it a little bit. So we do this event in New York, right? 1,000 people show up, DJs, waterfront, free barbecue, little kids drawing letters to the president saying, please make Loving Day official, dancing, good vibes, strangers talking to strangers, the whole thing, right? And then you walk out of it and you're on the subway and people are hassling you and you're like, oh, here we go, right? So, I mean, I think what we try to provide is a space that does not commonly exist out in the world, right? I mean, I think that sort of includes what you're talking about, like segregation in schools and neighborhoods, et cetera. But I mean, beyond that, New York City is pretty diverse, right? But even there, you don't get that like super all together, like no one's gonna give you crap for your unusual or like not typical in the United States identity that doesn't fit neatly into a box, you know, and you're gonna be able to have this conversation, people might know what you're talking about, and you're gonna feel good about it. All on top of you, right? So it's like we're providing that space for both like the festivity, but also for the conversation that needs to happen. So I think to some extent, yeah, the world is not where it should be, you know? And there are places where people come together, like the salad bowl, but it's pretty rare that it's like you can almost talk to the person next to you with the feeling that you can just launch in and not worry about the fatigue as much, at least.
Can I add one more thing to it? I mean, for me, I think it's the question is, what do you do in the in-between space, between where we are and where we want to be? And is it possible to do things that promote the possibility of where we want to go? So in our thing, the economies of scale, especially in New York State, suggest that those districts aren't viable long term. They simply aren't. The governor has said that, the state legislature has said that. That's where that's going in New York State. It really is. And so if that's, you know, it may be 10 years, it may be 12 years, and 2 of those districts were gerrymandered to create white. And so, you know what I'm saying? So it's almost the circles going around. Can you then have a program that engages the school officials, right, and schools and teachers and parents and students, that demonstrates that may not be the worst thing in the world, and demonstrates the value of that? And so that's kind of, you know what I mean? And like you're missing, you don't hit that, but I think that's the idea, is to see if you can take advantage of that in-between space.
I think it's also really powerful to hear. I think it's really powerful to hear a group of a school that is not a fully integrated school say, you know what, we aren't where we want to be, but that doesn't mean we don't want to instill these values in you and that we don't value these as well.
Sorry.
I wanted to thank all of you. I really enjoyed listening to these examples of where there is important work happening outside of schools. I'm particularly interested in Mark Granovetter's stuff around the strength of weak ties, and I think all of you are providing examples of how when we get people to meet each other and build a relationship, not just a one-off, but to build a relationship, that we learn things we wouldn't have known otherwise. So we get to a school in a different situation and we've had that experience and we've learned something from real people, not just the media and what's out there. I think that's really, really important. I wrote my master's thesis for a master's in conflict resolution on contact theory and social network theory and a case study at Selma, Alabama, and I went there because I had lived there for a while and I had some access, and it's a manageable community, not because it's the only community in this country that's dealing with segregated schools. But the segregation is very significant there, and I interviewed 10 young people, 3 of whom had had the experience of going to school in a school that within the walls was integrated. The other 7 were in completely or almost nearly completely same-race schools, both white and black. And what I wanted to know from them is, first of all, I only interviewed people who had some experience with the other. So for those 7 who didn't go to schools that were integrated, I wanted to find out how they had experience with the other. And then I wanted to know how did that impact their attitudes. And it was amazing to hear the stories that they told about how their personal relationships, wherever they had found them, had really impacted their attitudes, to the point that they would contrast themselves with their parents or their peers who hadn't had those same relationships. And in Selma, some of that was summer league baseball or other kinds of out of the school, out of the classroom, extracurricular type activities. Some of it was when they had had a chance to travel. But what I was hearing and what all of you were sharing were other kinds of these opportunities, and I think that this idea of the spaces in between, I think that's where this strength of weak ties, coupled with kind of how do you promote positive contact, really can have a major impact in pushing a community forward that hasn't figured out how to do it in its system yet, if it's a school system or other systems. So I hope that there's ways to grow these programs, and I'd be interested to hear, if we have any more time, to hear if any of you have run up against struggles in growing the programs, or if you have found ways to connect to other programs in a way that gives you the opportunity to grow.
I wonder if that's a great question. I wonder if we can hold it just for a second. I know you've had your hand up for a while. Yeah.
That integration and more desegregation is not a cure for monoculturalism. It's not a cure for the pain and the exclusion that is a result of monoculturalism. And it's very costly to people of color, emotionally and cognitively, and it is very costly to white people who are giving up whatever it is they have. So I want to say thank you to all of you for providing the engagement, the opportunities for contact at the individual and interpersonal levels, while others address the organizational and systemic levels of monoculturalism. It is no surprise to me that people of the African American community are saying, excuse me, but I don't do white people on weekends. That's what some clients have said to me. Because a part of surviving oppression is to internalize it and not be fully ourselves in relationship to white people. That's a skill that has to happen over time in terms of emotional healing. But there are also some behavioral skills that our young children need to be taught in integrated schools, and teachers need to model. So now I'm done.
Bill?
I have a question about blowback, especially in the elementary school issue. And the concern is understand racism and power relations between people of color. Race in the playground. So it's clear that kids are learning this and bringing it with them into these contexts. I was just curious about the amount of blowback you get from parents. But I was curious about it. Once you told me where it was, I was less curious about it. They can afford it, which raises a different issue.
Totally.
And the question there is, and this isn't meant to be mean, but it really is a question. Is it in some way commodifying the diversity experience in those schools? They're securing it as a resource to equip their children with that enables their marketability. In that sense, we have to be aware, at least, of that kind of commodification, because clearly working class whites aren't looking for it. Too many are. And so there's resistance coming from other pockets. So once you said where it was coming from, it raised the second question. But I'm very curious about it.
Well, I'll answer your second question first, since I was thinking about it. Yes, we go into schools, and like I said, often we're pulled in from anything from a specific instance that's happened, and we're almost damage control. They're like, oh, don't worry, we've called in some diversity consultants. You know, everything's okay. We're doing a workshop on 2 Wednesdays after school. You know, we'll be there. And, you know, we're just a big Band-Aid. We're anything from that to, I guess, the next step would be like, oh, we have diversity in our mission. We don't know what that means. We have a 13% diversity rate, which basically just means non-white. And, you know, but we speak 12 different languages, and there's someone who has ethnic food day, you know? So that's like the next step. And then there's schools that are really like, we want all of our teachers to be anti-racist teachers. I like to think that we work with all of them, because they are all part of the puzzle. They are all part of the infrastructure of the New York education system. So we do work with all of them while trying to, yes, all the time be so aware of the fact that, you know, we have a lot of work to do in those former examples. What was your first question? Oh,
That's
about,
okay. I understand the first question now.
So we have to,
relate.
my co-organizers will get very mad if my session isn't, because I'm known for not being a good timekeeper. So I want to very quickly go to Maureen and then to Roz, and then I'm sorry, but we're going to have to close up.
I'm the director of Teaching Tolerance, and we deal with this issue across the country. And I can see your point. I think that I've seen it in various permutations. I think sometimes that it's like, remember when we began to get involved in globalized business, and there were all these business manuals about how to do business with foreigners, you know, how to be culturally conscious in business. So to some degree, what you're saying is a class that has been dominated by white women particularly, that is recognizing that the changes here, we need to figure out what to do with it. And in some cases, it might be opportunistic. I'll succeed if I do better. In many cases, I think there's a defensiveness about it. But I think the larger issue is there's a cluelessness about it. And the fact is that New York City, which is near and dear to my heart because I lived most of my life there, is not typical at all. And that what is far more typical, especially in parts of the country now where demographic change has been sudden, is complete bewilderment. And we need to be talking more about, when we talk about these kinds of diversity, not just diversity, but white privilege. And so that's really the challenge, I think. And the thing is, the training has to happen with teachers. Because you can create all the opportunities for contact you want, and those are essential, I think. But the teachers have to have those opportunities, they have to have those conversations.
I'm just going to quickly betray my own comments about time and say something like I'm Jesse, you appear to be a very humble person. I've done a lot of work in various areas, but lately I've been studying a lot about immigrant integration, and it's a completely different model and idea and definition necessarily sometimes of the word integration. And one of the things that I think is most powerful in the movement is that it is often framed as how do we make this community function in a healthy and prosperous way. And some of the things that Del Burns was talking about is like how do we bridge these different values? How do we bridge the value, like Chester's talking about, of opportunity and cohesiveness and liberty and freedom, and then also personal relationships.